The rhythmic, mechanical click of the keyboard was the only anchor keeping Emily Vance tethered to the reality of the small, air-conditioned office in downtown San Antonio, Texas. Inside, surrounded by stacked financial ledgers and glowing dual monitors, the world was orderly, predictable, and clean. As a senior accountant and forensic auditor, Emily possessed a rare gift. She could look at a chaotic sea of spreadsheets, cross-reference data points, and spot a microscopic anomaly, a missing decimal point, a shell corporation, a hidden asset within minutes. Her brain was wired for tracking truths that others tried desperately to bury. Yet, for the past 5 years, that very same brilliant mind had developed a profound, deliberate blind spot when it came to the ledger of her own life. Emily was 40, an age where many had settled comfortably into their skin, but her posture still carried the guarded stiffness of the girl she used to be. She had lost both of her parents to a tragic accident before she finished college, leaving her entirely alone in a vast, indifferent world. That premature grief had carved an insatiable, aching void deep within her psyche, a desperate, almost obsessive craving for a complete home. To Emily, a family wasn't just a social unit. It was a fortress against the terrifying randomness of loss. When she met Daniel Harper, an architect with a boyish charm and an established family network in the area, she believed she had finally found her anchor. She was determined to keep that anchor secure, even if it meant burying her own instincts under a mountain of rationalization. In the quiet math of their daily existence, Emily was the invisible foundation that kept the Harper household afloat. When they bought their home in Converse, Texas, it was Emily's steady corporate salary that secured the loan, and it was her bank account that covered 60% of the monthly mortgage payments. But her contributions didn't stop there. Daniel ran a small contracting and HVAC business. While he was talented at architectural design, he was disastrous with cash flow, invoicing, and regulatory compliance. Every evening, after her grueling 10-hour shift, Emily sat at the kitchen table to untangle his messy invoices, balance his business books, and file his corporate taxes for free. She viewed it as an investment in their collective future, firmly believing that love meant carrying the heavy end of the log without a word of complaint. The tragedy of Emily's sacrifice was that it was entirely invisible to the people who benefited from it most. To Daniel's mother, Linda Harper, a prominent middle-class matriarch from an old San Antonio family, Emily was nothing more than a cold, transactional outsider who didn't know her place. Linda never missed an opportunity to subtly erode Emily's worth, weaponizing a polite, Southern passivity to deliver venomous blows. At Sunday dinners, Linda would pour sweet tea and remark to the extended family, "My poor Daniel works himself to the bone out on those dusty construction sites just to keep a roof over their heads. It must be so nice for you, Emily, to just sit in an air-conditioned office all day, tapping away at a little keyboard and watching the money appear." Whenever Emily looked to Daniel for support, she was met only with the crushing weight of his cold violence. He never raised his voice. Instead, he withdrew completely into an icy, suffocating silence. If she expressed her hurt, he would sigh heavily and step out onto the balcony to smoke a cigarette, effectively shutting down the conversation. "She's old. Why do you have to be so petty?" he would murmur with passive-aggressive dismissiveness. "Do you always have to calculate every single penny and every little comment? She's just old-fashioned. Emily, stop being so sensitive." To keep the peace, to preserve the fragile illusion of the home she so desperately needed, Emily learned to swallow the glass. She stayed silent, burying her discomfort deeper and deeper for the sake of the life growing inside her, their unborn daughter, Grace. When baby Grace finally arrived, it was into a silence that mirrored the marriage. Emily spent 3 exhausting days at Brooke Army Medical Center, BAMC, holding her daughter against her chest while the rain tapped gently against the window pane. The Harper family never came, No flowers, no casseroles, no celebratory balloons. Only the night nurses offered comfort. On Thursday afternoon, the heavy humidity of the Texas summer seemed to seep through the hospital walls. Daniel sat in the visitor's chair, his eyes glued to his phone, his mind miles away. Emily was gently folding a pale pink, hand-knitted baby blanket, the last physical connection she had to her own mother, who had lovingly sewn every stitch while battling the final stages of illness before she passed. It was a sacred relic of true, protective maternal love. Daniel looked up, his expression unreadable, and noticed the fabric. "That blanket looks like it's gathered some hospital dust, he said, his voice unusually gentle, adopting the familiar facade of a caring husband. "Why don't you let me take it home? I'll run it through the wash and dry it so it's perfectly fresh and clean for when I come back to pick you and Grace up for discharge tomorrow." A wave of rare gratitude washed over Emily's exhausted frame. She smiled weakly, handing him the precious blanket, believing his gesture was one of genuine thoughtfulness. She had no way of knowing that Daniel's sudden attentiveness was merely compliance. He wasn't taking the blanket to wash it. He was taking it because Linda had demanded to see it, systematically executing the first step of a cruel plot that would exploit Daniel's fatal weakness and alter the trajectory of their lives forever. Friday morning arrived with a brutal, oppressive heat wave that seemed to bake the very asphalt of San Antonio. Inside Brooke Army Medical Center, the discharge papers were officially signed, stamped, and finalized, but Daniel was nowhere to be found. Instead, a curt, sterile text message flashed on Emily's phone screen. "Caught up at a job site in New Braunfels. Total payroll emergency. Take an Uber or call a cab. I'll meet you at the house." It was the ultimate, undeniable confirmation of her status in his life, an afterthought, an invisible entity. Emily did not cry. She had no tears left for the expected. The night nurse, Sarah Kim, her face a quiet mask of righteous indignation, silently helped Emily load her bags and wheeled the bassinet down to the curb. Alone in the blistering July humidity, Emily buckled 3-day-old Grace into the back seat of her 10-year-old Subaru. The heat wrapped around the vehicle like a wet, suffocating towel. As she navigated the heavy traffic down Interstate 35 toward their home in Converse, the old car's air conditioning groaned under the strain, echoing the heavy, hollow dread settling deep within her chest. In the back, Grace slept peacefully, a tiny, fragile miracle entirely unaware of the fracturing world around her. When Emily finally pulled into the gravel driveway of their suburban home, Daniel's pickup truck was conspicuously absent. But sitting dead center on the wooden porch, baking under the relentless Texas sun, was a beautifully wrapped gift box. It was covered in pale pink paper and tied with a pristine white satin ribbon, the exact sort of celebratory aesthetic one would expect to see at a joyous baby shower. Taped to the top was a small, cream-colored envelope, carrying a sleeping Grace inside first. Emily settled the baby gently into the bassinet in the living room before returning to the porch to retrieve the box. She slid the note out of the envelope. Inside was a heavy piece of cardstock containing a single, typed sentence, "Save yourself the embarrassment." There was no signature, but the psychological branding was unmistakable. It carried the exact, haughty venom of Linda Harper. Inside the house, beneath the rhythmic, low hum of the ceiling fan, Emily pulled the satin ribbon and lifted the pink lid. The air immediately left her lungs, and the room seemed to tilt. Resting at the very top of the box was the pale pink, hand-knitted baby blanket. It was the exact heirloom Daniel had taken from the hospital room the previous evening under the guise of washing it. It had never seen a washing machine. It still carried the faint clinical smell of the maternity ward, but now it was heavily overlaid with the suffocating, cloying scent of Linda's expensive lavender perfume. Beneath the blanket lay something even more chilling, a duplicate plastic hospital identification band, identical to the one currently fastened around Grace's tiny ankle, printed with her full name, medical record number, and birth date. And at the very bottom of the box was a thick manila folder containing official Behar County Court documents, a voluntary temporary guardianship agreement. Emily's eyes raced across the legal jargon. The document claimed that Emily Vance, due to severe emotional instability, profound postpartum complications, and an inability to care for her child, was voluntarily transferring temporary custody of Grace to Linda Harper. At the bottom of the page, Emily's signature was scrawled in black ink. It was a terrifyingly precise forgery. A cold, sharp panic clawed at Emily's throat. Her hands began to shake so violently that the legal papers scattered across the hardwood floor. This was not just a cruel, petty threat from a toxic family. This was a coordinated legal ambush. Suddenly, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway shattered the silence. Emily rushed to the window and pulled back the blinds. A white Behar County Sheriff's SUV had pulled up to the curb, its red and blue lights flashing silently against the blinding afternoon sun. Cruising in right behind, it was Daniel's pickup truck. Two uniformed deputies stepped out of the police vehicle, their expressions guarded and serious. Daniel climbed out of his truck, his posture rigidly rehearsed, his face wearing a perfectly manufactured mask of grave concern. In that split second, the true, insidious nature of the trap crystallized in Emily's mind. Linda Harper was a master of social optics and knew the laws of Texas inside out. She didn't actually expect Emily to just sign a piece of paper and hand her baby over. She expected Emily to do exactly what any traumatized, exhausted, hormonal new mother would do upon finding her dead mother's blanket stolen and her child's custody forged. Break down, scream, throw things, and act utterly hysterical the moment the police arrived. Linda had orchestrated the police presence. Daniel had been instructed to call the authorities, claiming his wife was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and was an immediate danger to herself and the newborn. Under Texas law, if the responding officers encountered a violently frantic, emotionally unstable mother and a cooperative husband presenting a signed custody agreement, they would be legally obligated to temporarily remove the child from the home for her own safety. Grace would be placed directly into the waiting, legally protected arms of Linda Harper. Emily stood in the center of her living room, looking at the flashing lights reflecting off the family photographs on the wall. She felt herself standing on the absolute edge of a precipice. If she let the panic win, if she let the anger dictate her reaction, she would lose her daughter before the day was over. And then a profound, icy stillness washed over her. The frantic hammering in her chest slowed. The trembling in her hands stopped completely. The desperate, invisible victim who had spent 5 years enduring psychological abuse to keep the peace died in that exact moment, and the forensic auditor awoke. Her brain, trained to analyze crime scenes disguised as balance sheets, instantly stripped away the emotion and looked at the raw data of the situation. This was not a family tragedy. It was a hostile corporate takeover. And Emily knew exactly how to audit a fraud. She calmly knelt, gathered the forged documents from the floor, and stacked them into a precise, neat pile. She picked up the duplicate hospital band and the pink blanket, draping it carefully over her arm. Walking to the front door, she unlocked it and stepped out onto the porch just as the two deputies reached the top step. Deputy Marcus Morales, a veteran officer with sharp, observant eyes, kept his hand rested cautiously near his belt, his posture tense. Daniel stepped forward, his voice dripping with forced theatrical pity. "Emily, please, just let the officers help you. We know you're not well." Emily ignored her husband completely. She looked directly into Deputy Morales's eyes, her face a canvas of absolute, serene composure. Her voice was steady, clear, and perfectly modulated, carrying the undeniable authority of a woman who commanded reality. "Good afternoon, Deputy Morales," she said, extending her corporate identification card with a perfectly still hand. "I am Emily Vance. I am completely lucid, entirely safe, and I would like to formally report an ongoing case of document forgery, identity theft, and criminal trespass. Please step inside out of the heat so I can present the evidence." Deputy Morales blinked, his tense posture instantly relaxing as he recognized the unmistakable cadence of an ironclad, rational mind. The gaslighting trap had not just failed, it had given Emily the exact legal leverage she needed to destroy them. In the days that followed the confrontation on the porch, a heavy, absolute silence descended upon the house in converse. It was not the suffocating, manipulative silence that Daniel used to punish Emily. It was the quiet, terrifying calm of a strategist preparing for deployment. Emily had undergone a radical, irreversible mindset shift. The broken woman who had spent 5 years weeping in the shadows of the Harper family, begging for scraps of validation, was entirely gone. She stopped asking the exhausting, futile question that traps so many victims. Why are they doing this to me? Instead, she accepted a brutal, liberating truth. Her happiness and the safety of her daughter were exclusively her responsibility. She ceased being a casualty of their malice and became the auditor of their destruction. Her first act was one of absolute emotional decoupling. When Daniel walked into the kitchen, his face pale and his voice trembling with rehearsed apologies, Emily did not argue. She did not yell, nor did she demand explanations. She looked at him with the same detached, clinical neutrality she used when evaluating a bankrupt corporation. To Emily, the marriage was no longer a sacred union. It was a fraudulent entity requiring immediate liquidation. Over a single weekend, while Daniel paced the hallways trying to minimize his mother's actions as a misunderstanding, Emily systematically dismantled the financial scaffolding that kept the Harper family afloat. Operating with quiet, lethal precision, she contacted an elite estate attorney in San Antonio and established an irrevocable blind trust, legally moving every penny of her premarital savings and inherited assets out of Daniel's reach. Next, she cleanly severed her name from their joint checking accounts, leaving only the bare legal minimum. The true execution, however, lay in the sudden withdrawal of her professional labor. For years, Emily had quietly managed the entire back end of Daniel's HVAC and contracting company, keeping the business compliant, liquid, and safe from tax audits. That Sunday night, the stark glow of her laptop screen illuminated her face in the dark room as she changed the administrative passwords to the accounting software and revoked her own access, the sharp, rhythmic snaps of the keys sealing the locks. The economic shock to Daniel's business was instantaneous. By Monday morning, without Emily's invisible hand balancing the ledger, the company's payroll system froze. Major material vendors withdrew credit lines due to unfiled quarterly reports, and a systemic cash flow crisis began to crush Daniel's operations. She proved to him, in a matter of hours, that without her invisible labor, his entire lifestyle was an illusion. But Emily knew that American jurisprudence did not care about poetic justice or financial retaliation. It demanded hard, irrefutable discovery. To win the upcoming custody battle, she needed to present the state of Texas with an unbreakable chain of evidence. She bypassed the slow, bureaucratic channels of the hospital's public relations department and reached out directly to her trusted ally, Nurse Sarah Kim at Brooke Army Medical Center. Emily did not ask for the hospital's hallway security footage. As a forensic auditor, she knew that grainy, masked images of a woman in scrubs could easily be dismantled by a slick defense attorney claiming a case of mistaken identity. Instead, she requested something far more damning: the system-wide audit trail. "Sarah," Emily said over a secure line, her voice entirely devoid of panic, cold and steady as iron. "I don't need to see who walked down the hall. I need the digital transaction logs of the electronic health record system for July 9th. The digital audit trail yielded exactly what Emily's professional instincts predicted. The records revealed that at precisely 2:14 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, a temporary administrative credential, originally issued to a data entry clerk, had been used to bypass security protocols and print a duplicate, barcode-assigned infant identification band for Grace Harper. The physical theft was clunky, but the digital footprint was permanent. Emily took the data and applied her specialized accounting skills to reconcile the fraud. Months prior, she had reluctantly prepared a freelance tax return for Rachel's boyfriend, Kevin Wallace. During that process, she had noted the specific virtual private network, VPN, protocols, and metadata headers associated with his digital signatures. Cross-referencing the hospital's login data with the metadata from Kevin's tax files, Emily discovered a flawless match. The IP address used to breach the hospital portal originated from a residential router registered under a dummy consulting LLC that Kevin owned. It was a textbook forensic reconciliation, a direct digital link connecting the tool of the crime straight to the perpetrator's keyboard. The final piece of the audit required physical verification. Emily called Deputy Marcus Morales back to the house, guiding him away from the nursery and straight into the master bedroom. The air in the room felt heavy and stagnant, smelling faintly of old wood and dust. She did not offer him a narrative of heartbreak. She offered him data. She pointed to the antique cedar chest resting beneath the window sill, the vault where her mother's pink blanket had been locked away. Morales knelt, pulling out a high-intensity forensic flashlight. Under the sharp blue beam, the fresh, bright silver score marks near the heavy brass lock mechanism became glaringly visible, contrasting sharply with the dark, aged wood. Someone had used a slim tension tool to bypass the lock while Emily was in the hospital. It was the undeniable, physical proof of criminal trespass and third-degree burglary inside her home, committed before Daniel had ever volunteered to take the blanket. Emily stood beside the deputy, her posture erect, her expression serene in the afternoon light. Every line item of the Harper family's conspiracy had been tracked, verified, and accounted for. The audit was complete, and the liability was entirely theirs. The limestone facade of the Behar County Courthouse rose against the San Antonio sky like a monument to unyielding permanence, its heavy, pale blocks radiating the intense, baking heat of the afternoon. Inside courtroom 4B, however, the air was shockingly cold, smelling faintly of industrial pine cleaner, varnished oak, and the sharp metallic tang of nervous sweat. The low, ominous hum of the ancient air conditioning unit rattled high above, vibrating through the heavy wooden benches where spectators sat in hushed anticipation. Linda Harper sat rigidly at the defense table. She wore a tailored, stiff navy blue church dress that rustled sharply every time she shifted her weight, and a double strand of heavy cream pearls rested against her throat. She exuded the absolute, unshakable confidence of a woman who believed that the law was a flexible, polite instrument easily manipulated by wealth, Southern charm, and family pedigree. To Linda, this entire proceeding was an offensive, minor domestic misunderstanding, a vulgar inconvenience that would immediately dissolve once the judge realized who the Harpers were. She periodically smoothed her hair with a manicured hand, her diamonds clicking softly against the polished mahogany table. Rachel sat directly beside her, her eyes rimmed with red, her fingers relentlessly shredding a white tissue into tiny, snow-like flakes that drifted onto her lap. Next to them, Kevin Wallace sat entirely motionless, staring blankly at the dark wood grain, his face the color of ash. Then, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, letting in a brief gust of warm hallway air, and Emily Vance walked inside. She did not enter with the slumped, defeated posture of a victim, nor did she carry the frantic, exhausted aura of a traumatized postpartum mother. She moved down the center aisle with the measured, terrifying grace of a senior forensic auditor stepping into a corporate boardroom to deliver a terminal assessment. She wore a sharp, minimalist charcoal blazer that fit her with military precision, her dark hair cut into a clean pixie style that offered no shadows to hide behind, and her eyes completely clear and unwavering behind her glasses. In her arms, she cradled 3 large, meticulously bound, color-coded evidence binders. The visual contrast in the room was immediate and absolute. Linda had brought family arrogance. Emily had brought raw, irrefutable data. Taking her place beside the prosecutor, Emily calmly laid out her binders, the heavy plastic covers snapping against the table with a series of sharp, deliberate thuds that drew the judge's immediate attention. She presented them to Judge Rebecca Collins not as a narrative of emotional heartbreak, but as a clinical, forensic audit of a criminal conspiracy. File number 1 contained the exhaustive financial tracing of the Converse property. With line-item precision, Emily presented bank statements, wire transfers, and verified tax histories printed on crisp, white sheets. The numbers spoke in a language that could not be argued. Her steady corporate income accounted for exactly 60% of the home's total equity. The documentation utterly demolished the defense's narrative that she was a financially dependent liability who relied entirely on Daniel's manual labor. File number 2 was the digital audit trail from Brooke Army Medical Center. It contained the exact, time-stamped electronic logs connecting the digital security breach directly to Kevin Wallace's private router, proving with absolute mathematical certainty that a compromised administrative credential had been used from his IP address to print the duplicate identification band. File number 3 was the most damning of all, Linda's own handwritten notebook, recovered by Deputy Morales. As the prosecutor turned the pages, the faint scent of Linda's signature lavender perfume drifted up from the paper, a sickeningly sweet contrast to the obsessive, year-long text documenting Emily's body, her doctor appointments, and her daily schedules. At the very bottom of the final page, a sentence was circled heavily in dark red ink. The pen pressure so aggressive it had nearly torn the paper. Once the baby's here, everything changes. Judge Collins, a veteran jurist with a stone-carved expression, adjusted her reading glasses. The rustle of the pages as she reviewed the binders was the only sound in the suffocatingly quiet room. The turning point of the hearing arrived with the heavy, rhythmic thud of footsteps as Kevin Wallace was called to the stand. Having realized that Emily's digital tracking left him with absolutely no legal escape hatch, Kevin had accepted a plea agreement with the district attorney. His expensive suit looked hollow and oversized on him now, his shoulders slumping as he gripped the wooden edge of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. The prosecutor leaned forward, his voice cutting through the chilly air. Mr. Wallace, who directed you to fabricate the voluntary guardianship documents and secure the hospital identification band. Kevin swallowed hard, a visible tremor shaking his throat. His eyes darted briefly toward Linda, who sat perfectly still, glare fixed upon him like ice. He looked away, focusing on his white knuckles. Linda Harper, he whispered, the sound low and gravelly. She told me Emily was too stubborn and that we needed to make the documents look official enough to scare her into compliance. And did Mrs. Harper express any concern about the legality of accessing a secured medical facility or forging signatures? The prosecutor asked, his footsteps echoing softly as he walked closer to the stand. Kevin shook his head slowly, a dull, hollow sound escaping his throat. No, she said, by the time anyone figures out the paperwork is fake, the baby's already going to be permanently with us. A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the gallery behind them, a sudden wave of muttering that cut through the silence. Rachel burst into quiet, frantic sobbing, her shoulders shaking violently as she buried her face in her hands. Linda, however, did not flinch. She simply sat perfectly straight, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles in her cheek twitched, entirely insulated by her own narcissistic delusions. Judge Collins did not hesitate. She brought her heavy wooden gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack that sounded like a gunshot in the enclosed room, instantly silencing the gallery. When she spoke, her voice was a low, resonant wave of absolute, terrifying authority. "Mrs. Linda Harper," Judge Collins said, her sharp gaze pinning the older woman to her seat, "you have attempted to mask a malicious, calculated campaign of identity theft, criminal trespass, and child exploitation under the sacred guise of family preservation. Let me make this status abundantly clear to you. In the state of Texas, there is no such thing as a family matter when your actions cross the threshold into state and federal felonies." The sentence was unyielding and absolute, acknowledging the severity of the medical security breach and the forged legal instruments. Judge Collins sentenced Linda Harper to 6 months of actual incarceration at the Behar County Jail, followed by 5 years of strict probation, mandatory psychiatric counseling, and a permanent, non-expiring protective order prohibiting any contact with Emily or Grace. Rachel received a severe felony probation for conspiracy and fraudulent access, while Kevin Wallace's plea deal ensured the permanent, irreversible revocation of his legal career. As the courtroom cleared, the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind Emily for the last time. She walked out into the blinding, white Texas afternoon, the intense heat hitting her face like a physical wall, smelling of dry dust and hot asphalt. The heat felt clean, burning away the residual chill of the courtroom. In the concrete parking lot, the sound of hurried, heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. "Emily," she stopped, turning slowly to face the sound. It was Daniel. He looked a decade older than he had a month ago. The arrogant, icy silence he had used as a psychological weapon for 5 years had completely vanished, replaced by a hollow, shattered despair. The bright sunlight highlighted the deep, dark, purple shadows under his eyes, and the unwashed gray running through his hair. He looked at Emily and saw a woman who no longer required anything from him, neither his validation, his money, nor his protection. Her complete independence was absolute and palpable. "Emily," Daniel's voice cracked, a heavy, ragged breath escaping his chest as tears finally welled in his eyes. I've already spoken to a divorce attorney this morning." Emily stood perfectly still, her hands resting calmly on the strap of her bag, her expression entirely neutral, mirroring the vast, open Texas sky behind her. "And I'm filing," Daniel said, his shoulders dropping as his gaze fell to the shimmering heat waves rising off the black pavement. He managed a broken, devastatingly sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know I don't deserve another chance. 5 years. Every single time my mother crossed a line, I asked you to be quiet. I kept choosing the easy conversation instead of the right one. I thought my silence was keeping the peace." He looked up, the bright sun catching the moisture on his cheeks, his eyes desperately searching hers for an anger or a hatred that simply wasn't there. "I'm not filing because I don't love you, Emily. I'm filing because I finally understand something. Love isn't enough if you refuse to protect the people you love. My weakness made me a criminal in our own home." Emily looked at the man she had spent half a decade trying to fix, the man whose silence had nearly cost her the custody of her daughter. She felt a profound, quiet surge of validation, a warmth that settled deep into her bones, but no malice. Daniel reached into his linen jacket, the fabric rustling softly, and pulled out a crisp, signed, white document. It was a notarized custody and child support agreement. He handed it to her, his hand trembling slightly as the paper fluttered in the warm breeze. He had conceded to every single one of her terms without a single negotiation, entirely relinquishing custody and legally securing Grace's financial future. "Take care of our little girl," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant roar of the highway traffic. He turned around, his shadow stretching long across the gravel as he walked away into the shimmering, distorting heat of the parking lot. Emily watched him go until his figure blurred into the distance, holding the signed documents firmly against her chest. The paper felt solid, real, and heavy. The final piece of the master audit was resolved. The ledger was balanced, the accounts were closed, and she was finally entirely free. A year after the heavy oak gavel fell in the Behar County Courthouse, the world had slowed down to a beautiful, deliberate cadence. Emily Vance stood in the kitchen of a modest, weathered farmhouse just outside New Braunfels, Texas, watching the morning sun filter through the leaves of a massive, ancient live oak tree in the backyard. The house wasn't perfect. The wraparound porch creaked rhythmically in the wind, and the kitchen cabinets bore the charming imperfections of decades of use. But to Emily, every creak was a declaration of peace. The greatest transformation of the past 12 months had not been the change of her zip code, but the profound, irreversible shift in her internal landscape. Emily had entirely discarded the heavy, suffocating mantle of the victim. For years, she had been trapped in a loop of psychological misery, constantly asking herself why the people she loved and protected treated her with such calculated cruelty. Now, that question felt entirely irrelevant. She had come to understand that waiting for closure from your abusers is just another way of letting them keep you captive. She stopped mourning the marriage that never truly existed and stepped fully into the realization that she, and she alone, was the author of her daughter's environment and her own happiness. She owed no one an explanation, and she expected nothing from the past. This mental liberation was mirrored by a series of decisive, practical actions. Emily did not simply retreat into the countryside to heal passively. She built a fortress of independence. She converted the farmhouse's sunlit sunroom into the headquarters for her independent forensic auditing and tax consulting practice. Free from the corporate politics of her old corporate job, she select-chosen her clients, working with local businesses and helping women navigate financial restructuring post-divorce. She also took absolute command of her personal finance, diversifying her savings into secure, long-term index funds and property equity, ensuring that no one could ever threaten her economic stability again. Her physical transformation was just as striking. Emily cut her hair into a chic, dynamic, low-maintenance pixie cut that framed her face with a newfound sharpness. She packed away the rigid, dark charcoal corporate suits that had served as her armor for a decade, replacing them with fluid, comfortable wrap dresses in warm pastels and soft cream tones. She started attending hot yoga at a small studio in town 3 mornings a week, deliberately sweating out the residual physical tension of her past life, her body becoming leaner, stronger, and more grounded with each passing day. Late autumn had turned the Texas sky into a brilliant, endless canvas of sapphire and gold. Today was Grace's first birthday, and the timing coincided perfectly with the magical window photographers called the golden hour. The late afternoon light poured over the wooden porch, painting everything in a warm, honeyed glow. Out on the rug, Grace, a thriving, chubby-cheeked toddler with bright, inquisitive eyes, giggled as she reached out her tiny hands. She wasn't crawling anymore. With a sudden, brave surge of energy, she stood up on her own 2 feet, stabilized her balance, and took her very first wobbly, independent steps across the floor. She was chasing Charlie, the senior golden retriever Emily had adopted from a local rescue center a few months after the trial. Charlie was slow, infinitely patient, and seemed to instinctively understand that his primary mission in life was to provide a soft place for a little girl to land. Grace successfully crossed the distance, grabbed a handful of Charlie's thick golden fur, and proudly announced her very first word. "Doggy." Charlie simply sighed, resting his heavy head on his paws, as if he had been waiting his entire life for that exact moment. Emily watched the scene, a serene, effortless smile gracing her lips. In the yard below, the people who had actually shown up for her were gathered around a rustic wooden picnic table. There was no Harper family present, but the space was entirely full. Carol Martinez was there, wearing her favorite gardening apron and setting down a massive, homemade peach cobbler. Nurse Sarah Kim had driven all the way down from San Antonio, carrying a stuffed teddy bear, almost as large as Grace. Even Deputy Marcus Morales, now a trusted family friend, had stopped by after his shift, handing Grace a brightly wrapped children's picture book. No legal briefs or technical audits this time, he joked, his laughter ringing across the yard. Just bedtime stories. Looking at them, Emily felt a profound wave of clarity wash over her. She had recently heard through mutual acquaintances that Daniel had quietly settled into his own life, managing his business independently, finally free of his mother's suffocating control. To her own surprise, she felt a genuine sense of warmth and well-being for him. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind only a calm, peaceful indifference. She was free, standing at the edge of the porch, bathed in the rich, golden light of the setting Texas sun. Emily pulled her pastel cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She felt completely liberated, proud, and deeply rooted in her own strength. Her internal monologue, now a gentle stream of absolute self-assurance, crystallized into a final, enduring truth. I used to think that silently standing behind everything, balancing the invisible ledgers and swallowing my own pain to keep the peace, was the ultimate definition of keeping a home. But I was wrong. In a relationship, if you make yourself invisible, people will eventually treat your sacrifice as a zero. Looking at the laughter in this yard today, I finally understand the ultimate equation of life. Blood creates life, but kindness creates family. Never confuse keeping the peace with accepting mistreatment. Real love protects, and real family shows up. And when someone repeatedly asks you to stay silent just to make their life easier, stand up, count your own value, and remember that your voice has never been invisible. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. Please like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Hope to see you on the next page.